Today we're looking at a yellow ink from Herbin Ambre de Birmanie. Hi, I'm Adam and I'm an ink guy. I get inks, test them, and share the results with you. And if you like videos like that, I would invite you to subscribe. You can also follow me on Instagram, and there's timestamps down below so that if you are in a hurry, you can skip around. But if you got the time, I'd appreciate you checking out the entire video. In order to make sure I have a range of experience with this ink, I do the writing samples. I then inked up the Duke 209 with a Fude nib to write for a day and take the notes for this video. In order to have some standardization in my writing samples, I always use Clairfontaine, Tomoe River, and Rhodia paper. Now, let's look at the writing sample. I picked this ink up in sample form, so it comes in a vial like this. And to keep my writing samples consistent, I use a Jinhao 159 with a Goulet 1.1 stub, a Jinhao X450 with a Goulet medium, and a Jinhao X750 with a Goulet extra fine. Let's take a look at the Clairfontaine. No bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 is no feather spread, halo sheen, and gorgeous shading all the way through. Ombre shading all the way through. Very funny with the name. Extra fine is a little lighter than the stub with no feather spread, halo sheen, that great shading all the way through. This is a beautiful ink. 10 seconds to dry. Medium is about the same tone as the extra fine with no feather spread, halo sheen, and still gorgeous shading the whole way through. 12 seconds to dry. The scrubby for both show us a ton of color variation because there is. Tomoe River. No bleeding, minor Tomoe River ghosting, except on the stub where there's much more. The 1.1 is no feather spread, halo sheen, it does have halo. All the darker areas are haloed because it has a lot of shading that's going on. With the darker of the shading comes the halo. So the BR, there's halo there, but it's not at the top of that B, it's not in the ER of the Herbin. So it is there, it does have halo and shade. They occur together. Extra fine is quite a bit lighter than the stub with no feather spread, halo sheen, a very minor shading. There is some there. Brown starts slightly darker, gets a little bit lighter. So it's there, it's subtle. You look at the word dry and it's much lighter than the word jumps. 16 seconds to dry. Medium is about the same tone as the extra fine with no feather spread, halo sheen, still some very nice shading going on. Again, you have to look at where the lighter in the darker is. The word dog is certainly lighter than the word brown. 20 seconds to dry. Now the scrubby for both aren't really showing color variation, although we are getting it in the writing. And Rhodia. No bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 is no feather spread, halo sheen, some very nice ombre shading throughout. Look at what's going on in the D. It starts lighter and works its way darker. It's very nice. Extra fine is a little bit lighter than the stub with no feather spread, halo sheen, very nice subtle shading, shifts throughout like quick goes darker to lighter to darker. And 12 seconds to dry. Medium is about the same tone as the extra fine with no feather spread, halo sheen. The shading shows itself better here. Look at the word brown, how it, even in the B, it's got light, darks, lights, mids, goes dark to R. It's very nice. 15 seconds to dry. The scrubby for both show a ton of color variation because this ink has a ton of color variation. I agree with Vita that we learn a lot when we do multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done. I put a line of ink down and immediately put it into water for 10 to 15 seconds. And we see this kind of salmony peach color on the bottom that's pushing its way up, and then we get a very bright, solid yellow there. It's not a faint yellow at all. The one on the right, I let dry for 10 minutes before I dunk it into water. And a very noticeable change here is that peach line across the bottom is really gathering and getting into this filter paper quite quickly. Resistance tests are done to see how well this ink can be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it might be to clean from your pen. I let the smear dry for 3 days before testing it. Looking at the highlighter, the lowercase h makes me say I wouldn't use it in a note-taking situation if I'm going to go back and highlight. Now, water is starting to break up the darkest tones, but it is not getting rid of that peach that we saw in the second chromatography that had bonded in a line on the bottom. Pen flush is starting to break it up. We do start to see the beginnings of the white of the paper coming through in the very center of it. So that's only 30 seconds of that flush sitting right on top. I think that a little more time and a little bit of elbow grease, probably no elbow grease at all, will get this completely out of your pen. I only had to use water. 1/3 bleach solution completely obliterates it, but you're not going to need it. I test viscosity or flow with a thing called a tilt test. I'll link it somewhere down below or up in the cards. Now, for the inks I've tested, I have found an average viscosity of 2.5, with the realm of normal being from 2.1 to 2.9. Herbin's Ambre de Birmanie, I'm going to butcher that every time, has a viscosity of 1.26, making this a super wet ink. To find my average dry times, I use my writing samples done on Clairfontaine, Tomoe River, and Rhodia paper. I average those. Now, for the inks I've tested, I have found an average dry time of 17 seconds, with a realm of normal being from 13 to 21 seconds. Herbin's Ambre de Birmanie, good lord, horrible American pronunciations, has an average dry time of 14 seconds, making it normal. We're going to be able to look forward to a lot of bad pronunciations on the Herbin's now. Instead of finding inks that look like Herbin's Ambre de I would prefer to find an ink that complements its color on the page. So I wanted to go with a nice blue, and I chose the Atramentis Midnight Blue. The second writing sample was done on yellow Rhodia, P. Berger, and white lines paper. Here we're looking at yellow Rhodia paper. Not that I think that this is something people are going to use in a professional environment, but the chromatography's yellow really made me wonder what would happen to the performance of this ink on a yellow backdrop. And what we see is, in reality, it's making the shading much more obvious. We're not seeing any kind of tone change, but the amount of shading that we're seeing is actually more obvious than it is on the white, which is very interesting. I almost expected to wind up with a more solid tone. This is P. Berger, a French rules student grade paper. Lots of bleeding, lots of ghosting, not touching the page underneath, but you can't use the back of the page. The 1.1 has a ton of tiny feathers all over it. No spread, no halo, no sheen, no shade. The extra fine is lighter than the stub, with no feather spread, halo sheen, no shade. The medium is just a little bit darker than, 4 seconds to dry. The medium is just a little bit darker than the extra fine, nowhere near as dark as the stub. It does have feathering all over it, tiny feathers all over it. No spread, halo sheen, no shade, 6 seconds to dry. Now the scrubby for both do show the tiniest bit of color variation, although we're not getting it in the writing. Last up is white lines paper. Now, we do get where the extra fine actually got deeper into the page than the medium, which was unusual to me, but that's what happened. We do get a fair amount of ghosting. It would stop me from using the back of the page, but it might not stop you. The 1.1 has no feather spread, halo sheen, no shade. The extra fine is lighter than the stub with no feather spread, halo sheen, no shade, 6 seconds to dry. Medium is the same tone as the extra fine with no feather spread, halo sheen, no shade, 8 seconds to dry. The scrubbies for both do show some color variation, but it's not in the writing, and that is all that I have for the writing samples. So what do I think of Herbin's Ambre de Birmanie? I am becoming a real fan of golden yellow inks like this one. They are absolutely fantastic. You get to see them shade from yellow to a beautiful golden brown, which is exactly what happens here. Another ink that is going to really be overlooked by many people because they see it as a yellow. And we're missing out by just avoiding it and deciding that these inks aren't any good. So what nib and pen give the best writing experience with this ink? A wet broad, hands down. A wet medium's not bad, but very wet pens certainly put down enough to really bring out the shading and make this ink look awesome and easy to read on the page. I put out a new ink review every single day, so that if you're not already subscribed, I'm going to remind you, go ahead and subscribe. Thanks for watching.